Randy Johnson does not hand out compliments. That is not a characterization. That is a fact built over decades of watching one of the most intimidating, uncompromising, ferociously competitive human beings the sport of baseball has ever produced operate at the absolute pinnacle of his craft. A man who spent the better part of 2 decades making the greatest hitters alive look helpless. A man whose competitive standard was so unrelenting that even his own teammates approached him with a certain careful respect. A man who, when asked to assess the performance of others, has always chosen precision over generosity, who has never inflated an evaluation to make someone feel good, who has never reached for a superlative when a measured observation would do. Randy Johnson, the big unit, 5 Cy Young Awards, 4,875 career strikeouts, a perfect game, a World Series championship, and a Hall of Fame plaque that represents one of the most dominant pitching careers in the history of American professional sports, has given Shohei Ohtani the highest praise he has ever publicly offered any player. Not the highest praise he has offered a hitter. Not the highest praise he has offered a two-way player or a Japanese import or a player of Ohtani's generation. The highest praise he has offered any player. And the words he chose, specific, deliberate, carrying the full weight of a competitive intelligence that has spent a lifetime measuring greatness against the most demanding personal standard imaginable, are now reverberating through every corner of the baseball world with the force of something that cannot be easily dismissed or contextualized away. Shohei is at his best ever right now. 7 words. From Randy Johnson. About Shohei Ohtani. This is the full story of what those words mean, where they come from, and why the baseball world cannot stop talking about them. Before we explore what Randy Johnson said about Ohtani, we need to spend time understanding why his opinion carries a weight that most praise simply does not. In every field of human achievement, there exists a hierarchy of credibility. The opinion of someone who has attempted what they are evaluating and failed carries more weight than the opinion of someone who has never tried. The opinion of someone who has succeeded at the highest level carries more weight still. And the opinion of someone who has not merely succeeded but has dominated, who has stood at the absolute summit of their profession and looked down at the competition from a height that very few ever reach, carries a weight that is in its own separate category entirely. Randy Johnson is in that final category. When he stepped onto a major league mound, he was not simply a very good pitcher competing at the highest level of the sport. He was a force of nature in cleats, 6 feet 10 inches of controlled aggression, delivering a baseball from an angle that hitters described as physically unlike anything else they faced in their careers. His fastball arrived with the velocity of a premium closer and the movement of a pitcher who had spent years developing the kind of late life that made it effectively unhittable when located correctly. His slider, the pitch that defined his peak years, is widely regarded by the hitters who faced it as one of the 2 or 3 most difficult pitches to make contact with in the history of the sport. He won 5 Cy Young Awards. He struck out 4,875 batters. He threw a perfect game at age 40. He won a World Series co-MVP sharing the stage with Curt Schilling in one of the most memorable October performances in baseball history. And through all of it, his public assessments of other players have been consistent in one quality above all others: honesty. Randy Johnson does not say things to be kind. He does not reach for enthusiasm when skepticism is more accurate. He does not build players up for the benefit of a television segment or a media moment. When Randy Johnson says something is the best he has ever seen, the baseball world listens. Not because he is famous. Because he has earned the right to define best. The statement itself arrived in a context that made it more powerful, not less. Johnson was not asked a leading question designed to produce a favorable quote. He was not participating in a segment specifically structured around praising Ohtani's current performance. The conversation in which his assessment emerged was broader, a discussion of the current state of baseball, of where the sport stands relative to its own history, of which players from the current generation will be remembered in the company of the all-time greats. It was in that context, unprompted, uncoached, emerging from his own analysis rather than from a question that suggested its own answer, that Johnson delivered the assessment that has since spread through every medium the baseball world uses to process and discuss what it watches. Shohei is at his best ever right now. Break that sentence down word by word, because each component carries specific meaning when you understand who is delivering it. Shohei. Not Ohtani. Not the kid or that Dodgers player, or any of the distancing language that people sometimes use when discussing players from outside their own era. The first name. The familiarity of someone who has paid close enough attention to feel that he knows what he is talking about at a personal level of observation. Is at his best ever. Present tense. Not had a great week or is having a strong stretch. A declaration about the current state of Ohtani's performance relative to every previous version of Ohtani that has taken a major league field. Johnson is not saying Ohtani is good right now. He is saying that right now represents the peak of what Ohtani has ever been, which, given what Ohtani has already been, is an almost incomprehensible claim. Right now. The temporal precision of this phrase is not accidental. Johnson is not speaking about trajectory or potential or what Ohtani might become. He is speaking about the present moment, about what he is watching in real time and measuring against everything he knows about the history of the sport he spent his life mastering. Those three elements together, the familiarity, the peak comparison, the present tense declaration, make the statement something categorically different from ordinary praise. Johnson's comments did not stop at the present. He went further, into Ohtani's past, into the specific journey that produced the player currently standing at what Johnson is calling the peak of his career. And what he described reveals something important about how a pitcher of his caliber processes what he observes. Johnson did not focus on the statistics of Ohtani's earlier years. He did not cite the home run totals or the pitching records or the awards accumulated during Ohtani's time in Anaheim. He focused on something less visible but more fundamental, on the developmental arc of a player who arrived in Major League Baseball as something genuinely unprecedented and has spent every year since becoming more completely himself. The young Ohtani who arrived in the majors was already extraordinary. The tools were obvious, the power, the pitching velocity, the athleticism, the baseball intelligence that expressed itself in every aspect of his game. But tools, Johnson argued, are only the beginning. The history of baseball is full of players with extraordinary tools who never became extraordinary players, who allowed the gap between potential and performance to remain unclosed because the daily discipline required to close it proved too demanding or too unrelenting or too incompatible with the other demands that professional life places on young athletes. What Johnson identified in Ohtani's past, and what he credits for the peak performance he is now witnessing, is the consistent closing of that gap. Year by year, adjustment by adjustment, the incremental process of a player who treats his own potential not as a ceiling but as a floor. Who looks at what he was capable of last season and uses it as the starting point for what he intends to be capable of this season. That process, Johnson argued, is visible in retrospect in a way that it sometimes isn't in real time. Looking back at each version of Ohtani, the first-year player learning the specific demands of a 162-game schedule, the mid-career player refining his two-way approach, the post-surgery pitcher rebuilding his arsenal, the Dodger arriving in the league's most scrutinized market with the world's largest contract, you can trace a line of deliberate improvement that leads directly to the player Johnson is now calling the best version of himself. For a man who spent his own career on an identical kind of developmental arc, who was a promising but inconsistent pitcher in his early years before becoming one of the most dominant forces the sport has ever seen in his 30s, this recognition is not abstract. Johnson knows what it looks like from the inside. He recognizes the specific signature of an athlete who has done the long, hard, invisible work of becoming the fullest version of what they are capable of being. He sees it in Ohtani. And he said so publicly. If Johnson's assessment of Ohtani's present was striking, and his reading of Ohtani's past was revealing, it was his comments about Ohtani's future that generated the reaction that the baseball world is still processing. Because Randy Johnson, a man not given to overstatement, a man whose public statements are notable precisely for their restraint and precision, looked at Shohei Ohtani at what he is calling the peak of his career and said something that stopped the conversation cold. He said he wasn't sure this was the peak. Let that sit for a moment. The big unit, having just declared that Ohtani is at the best he has ever been, having grounded that declaration in decades of watching and competing against the greatest players in baseball history, having established the credibility of his assessment through everything his own career represents, then opened the door to the possibility that what we are currently watching is not the ceiling of what Shohei Ohtani is capable of. The implication is staggering. If this is not the peak, if the player Johnson is calling better than he has ever been has additional levels of performance available to him that have not yet been expressed, then what does that mean for the records, the comparisons, the historical assessments that the baseball world has been constructing around Ohtani's career? Johnson's reasoning was specific rather than romantic. He did not offer the vague optimism of a commentator suggesting that a young player has room to grow. He pointed to concrete elements of Ohtani's game that he believes remain in development, aspects of his hitting approach, his pitch selection in specific counts, his base-running intelligence in high-leverage situations, where the data and observation suggest continued upward trajectory rather than plateau. A player who is at his best ever and still improving is not simply a great player having a great season. He is an argument, a living, ongoing argument against the assumption that we have seen the limits of what a baseball player can be. Johnson made that argument. Quietly, precisely, in the language of someone who has spent a lifetime thinking seriously about what excellence in baseball actually requires. Ohtani has attracted praise from legends before. The baseball world has not been silent about what it is watching. Hitters who defined their generations have spoken about his at-bats with the specific recognition that comes from understanding what the pitcher across from him is trying to do and how consistently Ohtani defeats those attempts. Pitchers who face the greatest lineups of their era have discussed his two-way ability with the particular awe of someone who knows from personal experience how demanding each side of that equation is independently, let alone combined in a single player. But Johnson's comments exist in a different register than most of what has come before. Part of it is the specificity. Johnson did not offer the general enthusiasm of someone impressed by a highlight reel. He offered an assessment grounded in observation, in comparison, in the specific analytical framework of a pitcher who spent his career studying hitters with the intensity that survival at the highest level demands. His praise is structural rather than emotional, built from the inside out rather than applied from the outside in. Part of it is the timing. At his best ever right now, is a claim that can be verified in real time. It invites immediate scrutiny and comparison. It commits Johnson to a specific position that the ongoing season will either validate or challenge. That kind of commitment, making a definitive claim about the present moment rather than offering safely vague praise, is the mark of someone who has thought carefully about what they are saying and believes it completely. And part of it is simply who Randy Johnson is. The 5 Cy Young Awards. The 4,875 strikeouts. The Hall of Fame career that represents one of the high-water marks of pitching excellence in the sport's history. When a man with that biography says something is the best he has ever seen, the words carry a specific gravity that no amount of media amplification can manufacture or substitute for. The baseball world reacted to Johnson's comments with the intensity that genuine credibility always produces. Not the brief engagement of a trending topic that fades within hours, but the sustained conversation of people who recognize that something important has been said and want to fully understand what it means. There is a practical consequence to Randy Johnson delivering this assessment at this moment in the season. It changes how the baseball world watches Shohei Ohtani. Not because Johnson's opinion creates reality, Ohtani's performance exists independently of any assessment offered about it. But because when a credentialed observer of Johnson's stature declares that what is happening right now is historically significant, it recalibrates the attention that everyone else brings to what they are watching. Fans who were already engaged with Ohtani's season now watch with a sharpened awareness of the historical context Johnson has placed around each performance. Analysts who track statistical trends now frame their work against the specific claim Johnson has made. Other players, both his teammates and his opponents, now operate in an environment where the measuring stick has been explicitly raised by one of the most credible voices the sport possesses. This matters because Ohtani's greatness, as Johnson himself suggested, is not primarily visible in the box score. The numbers are extraordinary. But the process that produces them, the preparation, the adjustment, the consistent decision-making under pressure, is where the true story lives. And it takes a certain quality of attention, informed by a certain depth of understanding, to see that process clearly while it is happening rather than only in retrospect. Johnson's comments are an invitation to that quality of attention. They are a signal from someone who knows exactly what to look for, that what is currently on display is worth looking at with everything you have. Randy Johnson's career was defined by a standard that he set for himself and refused to lower regardless of circumstance. The mound was his territory. The strike zone was his instrument. The competitive battle between pitcher and hitter was the arena in which he expressed everything he had built through decades of preparation and competitive refinement. That standard, uncompromising, relentless, oriented always toward the absolute maximum of what was possible, is the lens through which he evaluates everything he watches in baseball. And when he looks at Shohei Ohtani through that lens and declares that what he sees is the best version of a player who has already been extraordinary, the praise is not generous. It is accurate. Ohtani meets Johnson's standard. Not the standard of ordinary excellence, not the standard of very good major league performance, but the specific, unrelenting standard of a man who spent his career defining what the absolute best looks like from the inside. The two-way performance. The preparation infrastructure. The in-game adjustments that reflect real-time processing of information at a speed and accuracy that no scouting report can fully account for. The consistent delivery in the highest leverage moments, the ninth inning hit, the walk-off, the multi-hit performances across consecutive games. The quiet self-management that has characterized Ohtani's approach since he was a teenager in Japan, eating precise meals and lifting before dawn. All of it, assembled over years of deliberate development, now expressing itself at what Randy Johnson, of all people, is calling the peak. 7 words from the big unit. Words that carry the weight of 5 Cy Young Awards and 4,875 strikeouts and a Hall of Fame career built on the most demanding personal standard the sport has ever seen expressed from a pitching mound. Shohei is at his best ever right now. The baseball world is paying attention. It should be.